Now, Human Rights Day is observed around the world every year on the 10th of December, but sadly, people in many places are facing intimidation, illegal detentions, jail sentences, and even torture for standing up for what they believe in. Here in Nigeria, Human Rights Day is proving to be a sensitive anniversary as activists demand answers from the government about what they say is a sweeping crackdown on freedom of speech and the rights of many to hold dissenting opinions. It was on December 10th, 1948, that the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which established a broad range of political, civil, economic, social, and cultural rights, including the right to life, freedom of thought and expression, and to privacy. Every year since that time, the world has marked this major achievement on Human Rights Day to celebrate human rights globally. Nigeria is a signatory to that declaration and is therefore bound by its tenets. In a moment, we'll discuss how far those rights are being upheld and protected in this country. But first, here's a brief history lesson on human rights and what they mean.
The idea of human rights is that each one of us, no matter who we are or where we are born, is entitled to the same basic rights and freedoms. Human rights are not privileges, and they cannot be granted or revoked. They are inalienable and universal. That may sound straightforward enough, but it gets incredibly complicated as soon as anyone tries to put the idea into practice. What exactly are the basic human rights? Who gets to pick them? Who enforces them, and how? The history behind the concept of human rights is a long one. Throughout the centuries and across societies, religions, and cultures, we have struggled with defining notions of rightfulness, justice, and rights. But one of the most modern affirmations of universal human rights emerged from the ruins of World War II with the creation of the United Nations. The treaty that established the UN gives as one of its purposes to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights. And with the same spirit, in 1948, the UN General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This document, written by an international committee chaired by Eleanor Roosevelt, lays the basis for modern international human rights law. The Declaration is based on the principle that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. It lists 30 articles recognizing, among other things, the principle of non-discrimination and the right to life and liberty. It refers to negative freedoms, like the freedom from torture or slavery, as well as positive freedoms, such as the freedom of movement and residence. It encompasses basic civil and political rights, such as freedom of expression, religion, or peaceful assembly, as well as social, economic, and cultural rights, such as the right to education and the right to freely choose one's occupation and be paid and treated fairly. The Declaration takes no sides as to which rights are more important, insisting on their universality, indivisibility, and interdependence. And in the past decades, international human rights law has grown, deepening and expanding our understanding of what human rights are and how to better protect them. So if these principles are so well developed, then why are human rights abused and ignored time and time again all over the world?
Well, we'll hope to get answers to that. For more about human rights in Nigeria and beyond, I'm joined now in the studio by the very well-respected civil rights activist and former Nigerian Senator Shehu Sani. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Would you say that the arc of history is drifting towards or away from respect for human rights in Africa in general and Nigeria in particular?
Well, thank you very much once again. Well, those who drafted the principles and letters and the spirit of Universal Declaration of Rights are conscious of the fact that without having such a template, it will be difficult to measure the performance of government in terms of their obligation and accountability when it comes to the issue of protecting the rights of citizens. We must recognize and agree to the very fact that human rights today universally is under serious threat. A threat from three angles. The first has to do with the war against terror. Since 9/11, there is an attempt by those who subscribe to the fact that we need to sacrifice some of our rights to secure our country and our people. And in the course of that, several dictatorial tendencies and oppressive laws were justified on the grounds of that. The second has to do with the rise of the far right, nationalism, ultra-nationalism. You see groups and individuals rising across the world, demanding that their country first, and in the process, fighting immigrants and bringing out and immigration laws and whatever.
Particularly in Europe and in
Europe,
America.
yes. And here in Africa, we are trying to adopt a dangerous trend whereby when leaders can build roads, hospitals, and schools and secure their country, and we are told to accept the fact that we can sacrifice our rights for that. Now, the problem with this is that we are building a tyranny around ourselves. Governments across Africa usually think that by conducting election, whether it's free, fair, or discredited, and they found themselves in the position of office, they think that they have the legitimacy to undermine and subvert the fundamental rights of citizens. And in Nigeria here, before 1999, we thought that we were done with systematic erosion of democratic values and violations of fundamental rights. But 2 decades after, we found ourselves being woken up by the reality that at no other time has our right been undermined and subverted and dangerously threatened as we are having it today.
That's a very interesting point you make, because there's always been the sense that democracy is the way forward, and that once you achieve it, you lay the groundwork for good governance, which includes adherence to the rule of law and respect for human rights. I mean, is that issue less clear today? Are we seeing a real slip in confidence that democracy will deliver those dividends?
Well, the attitude of the political establishment to fundamental rights is that of pick and choose. That area where you need to seek for an election or re-election, they accept that. And then to mount the position of power, they accept that. But when it comes to being held to account, to comply and kowtow to the very principles and spirits that those components that make what a democracy is all about, they have found it difficult to do that.
Well, beyond the general...
You see an increasing allergy to rights of people to express themselves.
Right, because I was going to ask you specifically, what are some of those fundamental principles of human rights that are being violated?
In Nigeria today, there are so many, but the basics one which you can see is the attitude of the government to the rights that have been granted to Nigerians by their constitution and their laws. You have seen the one that is most popular, disobedience to court orders, illegal detentions, attack on freedom of speech and the press, and their allergy and objection to protest and demonstration, no matter how peaceful it is. We have also seen how security agencies, the police, the army, have become so high-handed, and people are being framed up on all charges and an attempt to quieten and silence people. Now, the most important of all the rights we have is that of the right to express yourself. Once citizens are silenced, then darkness envelops our democracy. So in the Nigerian context, never had a time in the last 2 decades have our right been seriously been eroded as we have seen today. And what is most unfortunate is that those who come to power today were product and beneficiaries of those rights that they were given in the past. The whole democratic process itself came as a result of the acceptance by the military that dictatorship cannot work and that it is antithetical to our future as a people and as a nation, and we need to democratize. But here we are. People are afraid to express their opinion, and those who express their opinion ended up being arrested and framed up. So what kind of democracy are we having? So a day like this brings to spotlight those acts, because you are expected as a government, a signatory to Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to recommit yourself to protecting the rights of your citizens.
Because my next question was going to be, who should we entrust with leading the fight for greater human rights and more respect for it?
Well, there is nobody to entrust other than ourselves. Every citizen is a vigilante, is a custodian, and he is a cadre in terms of the defense of fundamental rights. And the need for vigilance is important because as things are going on now, most of the institutions of democracy have been compromised. When you have a coward judiciary, and we have a pliant and a sycophantic parliament, and a high-handed executive, you already have a dictatorship. So those institutions that were created to protect, institutional protection and shield for our fundamental rights, they themselves have been subsumed. So it is now left for the people, the civil society, the media, to stand up and defend those rights, because we fought to bring about democracy in Nigeria. Many people were killed, many were jailed. So it is unfortunate that 2 decades after all this sacrifice we made to restore democracy to our country, some people felt that they should dictate to us what should be our right and what should not be our right.
Picture a country of stagnating economic growth, mounting inequality, and high social anxiety. As poverty and financial panic spread and the benefits are more and more reserved for only a few, propped up by a terrifying secret police, trust in institutions is decimated as politicians scheme against the common people and governmental injustice deepens. The scene is set for a combustible mix of social resentment and economic discontent that could be dangerous for that country's institutional edifice. We're describing many countries in Africa, of course, where a few robber baron politicians enrich themselves at the expense of everyone else. Political betrayal is not by those clamped in irons and locked up indefinitely, but the real treason, according to one analyst, is by those elements of governments that undermine the rule of law. It is they who have upended democracy and freedom and have paved the way to institutional collapse. We remember these things because today is the United Nations Day for Human Rights, a day when the cry for justice rings out around the world. Here's the UN's Secretary General, Antonio Guterres.
Human Rights Day, we celebrate the role of young people in bringing human rights to life. Globally, young people are marching, organizing, and speaking out for the right to a healthy environment, for the equal rights of women and girls, to participate in decision-making, and to express their opinions freely. They are marching for their right to a future of peace, justice, and equal opportunities. Every single person is entitled to all rights, civil, political, economic, social, and cultural, regardless of where they live, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, social origin, gender, sexual orientation, political or other opinion, disability or income, or any other status. On this International Day, I call on everyone to support and protect young people who are standing up for human rights.
Antonio Guterres there, and still with me in the studio, the well-known civil rights activist and former Nigerian Senator Shehu Sani. Thank you for staying with us. And the UN Secretary General there, a reference to young people. That's the theme of this year's Human Rights Day. But would you say that human rights is no longer just about someone in authority using a hammer to break your legs or locking you up without due process? It recently has been expanded to include a fight for the planet, for the environment, as a fundamental principle of human rights.
Well, there has always been the issue of environment. Well, if you go through the concept of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you will see issues of education, of culture, of environment, and all that you have. And that is why it has been said that it is founded on three principles: the universality of it, the indivisibility of it, and the interdependency of it. Now, it is possible for rights activists in Europe to pick on the issue of the climate and make it a priority this year and then move on. And it may also not be a priority for a country like Somalia, where peace is what is most important.
Absolutely.
For those of us here, we are not even talking about the climate. The fact is, we are fighting for the basic rights, the right to even for people to express themselves without being arrested, framed, and jailed. And in a society where even the freedom of expression is seriously threatened, you have to fight that first battle before you move to the next battle.
That's a good point. So is it, I mean, did activists like yourself overestimate what democracy would deliver following the end of civil rule in Nigeria, for instance, in 1999? I mean, did you fail to see that without a fundamental reform of the institutions of state, such as the police, in all its forms, that those institutions would simply be wedded to their habits and would not be interested in adopting the democratic trajectory that the country in principle was adopting?
Well, in the 80s and 90s, our battle was to disestablish military dictatorship and restore democracy back to our country, or at least civil rule. And it was hoped that with that foundational struggle, we will now build upon it. But in the last 2 decades, we seem to have been returning back from 1999 to 2019. We are back to the same cycle where we took off, where those things that we thought we have overcome, we have defeated, we have achieved, are now still back at us, saying we have not gone anywhere. And from our experience in the last 20 years, it wasn't all darkness from 99 to 2019. It appears that the barometer of fundamental rights rises and falls. It depends on the democratic credentials of those people who are in power at a particular time.
And you think it's worse now than it's ever been?
Of course it is, unambiguously worse. I don't sit on the fence on that. Under the late President Umar Musa Yar'Adua, you can see the institution of government and the president himself is committed to obeying court orders, respecting fundamental rights of citizens, knowing fully well that this is the background he comes from. But what I have always said is that those who are encouraging violation of fundamental rights, those who are supporting breach of the rule of law and abuses of power, will not be there to defend the legacies when their principle is out of the transcendent power. So I have always said that leaders must constantly and consistently remind themselves that the buck stops on the table. If you violate right, abuse power, breach rule of law, persecute people, there will be nobody to stand to defend you when the time to account comes. So as far as fundamental rights are concerned at this time here, we have never had it so bad. But it is a challenge. It is still not too late to make amends. The government has it's just 6 months in its second tenure, and they have the opportunity to do what they need to do. They can reverse this within 24 hours. But if it's not reversed, certainly there are voices that will continuously and consistently criticize and hold them to account to it. Because it's clear, those who are occupying privileged positions to speak for the people are either afraid of speaking, or they are being sycophantic, or they are sitting on their fence-sitters. And that is dangerous.
We have quite a big global audience. We're across Africa, we're across Europe, and a lot of people outside Nigeria would be interested in the things you're saying, but may not have the facts to support what you're saying. What are some examples that you might give, recent examples, of this violation of human rights by this particular government in power? In Nigeria?
First of all, in an information age like this, everything is online. You just need to Google and see how protesters were treated in the last 4 years. You just need to Google to see how the principle of separation of powers was violated. You just need to Google to see how people who were granted a release order by the courts are being violated by the security apparatus of the state. So, as far as I'm concerned, I believe that if we are desirous of being a moral power continentally and globally, the obligation for us to respect those constitutional rights of citizens is very important. I will agree that nations have the right to adapt fundamental issues of rights to their own situations. But there are universal values which we have subscribed to and we signed to. And there is no reason why we can call ourselves a democracy and then deny people the right to express themselves. What I'm saying is that from 1999 to 2015, it was one political party that was in power. And all the sins, the atrocities, and the crime that has been committed, the corruption and whatever, has been subscribed to it. And those who are in the position of power today came on the premise that things have gone bad politically, socially, economically, security-wise, and human rights issues.
Absolutely.
Yes. So they are expected to do better. But from what we have seen, we are simply having a reversal. And for the world, it will not be acceptable for anyone to say that because a leader can build roads for you, can build schools for you, can build hospitals for you, so you should simply sacrifice your rights.
And of course, they're not always building those schools,
they
hospitals, or roads
yes.
either.
And we can't also sacrifice our rights on the grounds of national interest or national security, because national security can better be protected, defended, and shielded when people's rights are respected.